Thanks, panel. Let's open this up to questions. Please just put a hand up and direct it to anyone on the panel. And here comes the microphone.
Please identify yourself.
Those who spoke about the apprenticeship programs and opportunities, I guess I have three questions. One, are they connecting to high schools? Two, are they connecting to elementary schools? I have participated in inner city LA career education programs and forums in inner city LA elementary schools, which was really the time to try and reach these kids. Research shows that you can identify a child and family in need of early intervention by third grade. And we're not necessarily acting on that research. So that's the first question. The second question is, I remember when businesses trained the workers that they were looking for. And I see what I think is a reluctance to do that today. It seems that the businesses are asking for the trained workers without being willing to train the workers. So I would appreciate it if you could comment on that.
I can't comment too much on the first question. Although, we have a couple of education programs in schools to promote energy efficiency, and we have had great success with young people in elementary and middle school being ambassadors of energy efficiency. So not only will they lead on energy efficiency in the school, but then they'll take it home and make sure that those same measures are being done back at their residence. On the second question, I'm not sure I can say definitively. I will say that in architects and engineering communities, there is a very strong commitment to continuing education. And a lot of that continuing education is focused on, I'd say broadly, sustainability and the full spectrum of these solutions. But I'm not sure I can say that across the other industries. Certain companies I know, but without, just doing an advertisement, but there are a lot of companies that are members of ours that absolutely take workforce training very, very seriously.
My former colleague at the Washington Post, Stephen Pearlstein, has written a book that talks broadly about challenges of making capitalism work. And he points out that for 20, 25 years now, the whole focus of companies has been on maximizing earnings per share to the neglect of the context in which companies work, their communities, the workforce, and the society. And until that changes, until companies take a broader view of their purpose, it's going to be very hard to get things like job training to really be effective. So that's a perspective that he's written about. Any other questions or further comments? Anybody? Yes.
Good morning. I'm Tanuj Jura with Simple Energy and formerly the director of the Colorado State Energy Office. During my tenure with the state of Colorado, we were administering the Recovery Act funds. And a big part of the big tranche of money that was coming in for the Low-Income Weatherization Assistance Program, a big idea around that was how do we make the weatherization program sustainable past the Recovery Act funds themselves. I don't know that we did a great job of that. If we'd done a great job, maybe some of the workforce issues wouldn't be coming up now. I'm curious if you guys have looked at the lessons from the Recovery Act, the big chunk of money that came through in that, and were there things that were done well in trying to develop more sustainable workforce for energy efficiency in particular, or were there things that were done poorly that we now know if we do a program in the future, we'll do a better job of actually creating a sustainable industry?
I don't have the statistics top of mind. There was a great study that looked at weatherization, that huge investment in energy in weatherization. The jobs numbers were, as you can imagine, very, very good. The energy savings also were very, very good. I think it's, when you go from investing billions, going back to, $250 million annually in terms of weatherization, that's a drop off. So what's the part of the question is, what's the federal government continuing investment in weatherization going to be? I think it's interesting. Just so I would recommend referring to that study and digging in. I think there's probably more they could have done in terms of lessons learned on workforce. I think one of the things that's interesting on weatherization is that there are already legislators that are looking at it as in terms of an infrastructure investment, and how do we actually invest quite a bit more consistently in that program. In terms of one proposal, they were talking about $400 billion additional dollars in that program. I'm sorry, $400 million, $500 million additional in that program, and that's what I think it needs. I don't know if government works a bit incrementally, as you know, right? Unless there's a big issue, unless there's something we're going to do something big on infrastructure, if we're going to do something big like with stimulus, and I don't know if we've stood back and said, what should we really be investing in weatherization and getting to those opportunities. The other interesting connection that they're making with weatherization is, how do you start to weave in some of these smart building technologies with some of the more traditional energy conservation measures that are being used, and are there some opportunities to push a little further in each weatherized home?
I would just add briefly, one of the challenges that many utilities are facing and states as they look at the programs is that there are some pretty significantly reduced cost implementations that require virtually no labor for a lot of states. So if you look at how many water utilities in the Southwest, right, they just send all their customers a low flow shower head and say install it for free, or you do it yourself, and you save a lot of water that way. And LEDs and lighting is a huge part of building consumption. It's pretty cheap to just ship out a bunch of LEDs to your customers, and there's no labor. And many utilities and state agencies are looking at costs and their carbon goals, right? Another element that we should probably think about, and I think it's part of many of the Green New Deal conversations, which I think is a good thing, is the additional economic benefit of putting people to work. And so, yes, it is more expensive to have humans involved in a process, but those humans earn money, spend money, and pay taxes, so the benefits are much, much greater. I mean, even if you have the lighting manufacturer in your backyard, having people out doing weatherization work who weren't previously working creates a lot of economic stimulus for your region. So I think there are some lessons that we've learned, but I'm not sure that we've sort of cataloged them sufficiently to be able to have real guidance to say, here are the various metrics that are most helpful for how to make these difficult decisions.
So when we wind up
do you mind if I
I'm just going to jump in and ask each of the panelists if they have any final comments to make as we wind the panel up.
Great, thank you. Well, I wanted to comment on that question specifically, and maybe not to the metrics, but to say yes, there are definitely lessons that we've taken away from that. I mean, half of the energy employment in Utah is from energy efficiency. So you're talking, 60,000 plus jobs in the energy sector, and half of them are related to energy efficiency. And I think the RF funding era was certainly a stimulus for creating those jobs. And weatherization has been critical, and I would say from a state perspective, we've somewhat underfunded that historically, and so what we're taking away today is the need to increase funding. And so I think it's important to highlight that states can have a role in what they do, and that's a key lesson that we're taking away from that era, is what we're going to do in weatherization, how we're going to continue to build those jobs, and realize that value proposition for lower income families and households that may not otherwise have access to these energy efficiency improvements. I'm also proud to say that we just passed legislation to adopt the latest building codes for commercial and the residential sector. And our office, the Office of Energy Development in Utah, is charged with training on those standards. And again, it goes back to this public-private partnership. When you have a booming construction industry, you have to engage in that training if you're really truly going to realize the benefits of a cleaner economy. Energy efficiency in buildings is going to be key. Training that workforce is going to be key. And it can't all just occur through policy. Some of it can occur through policy, but much of it has to occur by building on those partnerships. And one final thing I want to highlight is that we do recognize the importance of making those investments in our public buildings and our schools in particular. So we're hoping for additional funding, in fact, this year, which will allow us to pursue more significant retrofits in our schools and public buildings. So the short answer to your question is that those were important lessons, and we took them to heart, and we're continuing to leverage them today. So great question. Thank you for asking that.
There is one question left from the floor here. This gentleman promises it's a good one, so no pressure.
Oh, boy. Thank you, David. John Gaffigan here representing Fend on industrial cybersecurity plus a variety of green tech. I'm an outsourced VP of sales. Somebody has to ask a controversial question here. We can't go without that. I didn't hear anybody talk about the N word today, being nuclear. And when we have an all-the-above approach, this is more just kind of an observation that I'd like everybody to kind of marinate on, is that we're decommissioning nuclear plants. And I would submit to you with unintended consequences about having a gap in trying to get alternate energy sources to be able to backfill that. There's a lot of real estate that's impacted. There's a lot of jobs lost. I have familiarity with some technology that dates back to the 60s with Oak Ridge Lab on molten salt reactors, which will allow you to take thorium, unenriched uranium, or spent nuclear fuels. That's the key one, because we have such a stockade of that. People can comment upon that, but you can burn spent nuclear fuels, which is a toxic liability, now become a productive asset and keep people working jobs and not have these big albatrosses of nuclear plants that are going to collect weeds. So I just, nobody talks about nuclear and they run for the hills, but I wanted to throw that out there.
I'm happy to talk about nuclear because we currently have Utah Association of Municipal Power Suppliers seeking to secure nuclear energy with the development in Idaho of over a 700 megawatt plant that's small modular reactors set to be online in the mid-2020s at a cost right now, anticipated levelized cost of around 5.5 to 6 cents kilowatt hour. And people think, well, that seems really high, but that is including all of those attributes that we associate with conventional energy. So it's not just on an energy basis, it's really including all of those resiliency and reliability attributes and capacity attributes that we associate with those resources. So we think that that's a really positive move in Utah and in the West generally. We also are looking at funding support for testing small molten reactor in Utah for purposes of creating a medical grade isotope. So when I said we're all of the above in Utah, I meant it literally. We are all of the above because we think the clean energy solutions are going to come from across the board. We're very advanced on carbon capture and sequestration. We have, I think, one of the potentially most advantageous and successful carbon capture technologies because it won't just be applicable to coal or natural gas generation. It will also be applicable to industrial applications. So we're committed. Exactly. So if we truly want to move towards that carbon neutral, carbon reduction in the future, we have to look across all of our resources and find those technological innovations that are going to be key. Carbon capture is part of that, and nuclear is part of that for our resource set.
Panelists, any other concluding thoughts?
Just to share that I want to join with everyone here in one thing that I know we all agree on, the need to have at least the doubling in the investment we're making in our energy research. We talk about what the energy mix looks like right now. We couldn't have necessarily imagined that 20 years ago. And so that is a really critical point. And also this theme of underfunding of the partners that exist, that are effective, and that need to be part of developing these solutions. And so if you're working on any of these issues and the folks around the room don't include leaders of color and the community leaders and the business entrepreneurs as well, that can tell you how to engage with their communities and understand the problems, then we need to address that as well. The solutions are there, the partners are there, the issue is scale and investment in the cross-sector partnerships.
You stole the words right out of my mouth. I mean, these are good jobs. These are inclusive jobs. These are diverse jobs. These are jobs that have to be done in place in those communities. So if we want to accelerate to a clean energy economy, we should be investing in these types of jobs, whether that's workforce training, whether that's the innovation engine that is DOE and the investment in EERE, whether that's tax policy, or whether that's everything that we're doing on programs like weatherization and the state energy program. I mean, this is an agenda.
And I'll just make three quick points to remedy the late notice of policies matter. So three quick points on why policies matter. One is just things to remember as we develop these policies. The great thing about doing this report is that, unlike sometimes when we talk about energy and climate change and all these things, sort of we think about, you know, metric tons of carbon and we try to imagine it. These are human lives, okay? So whatever we do with policies, let's not allow ourselves to think that the 7,000 lives and livelihoods of people in the coal industry who lost their job is less important than the thousands of people who got employment in storage, for example. So remember, these are people's lives, and we should have policies in place that help with that transition, and I think we can do a lot better there. Second, look to the sidelines. We've said that a few times here. We have to get past bad proxies that are being used currently in employment and invest in people and recognize that if we want to help people get off the sidelines who are poor, we need to understand that they are suffering from the trauma of poverty, and therefore things like apprenticeship programs are meaningful because they need to work and earn money. They cannot afford. There is a cost to going to training, and if you're poor, you can't afford to not work. So we have to make sure that we do learn and earn for them. And then the last piece, and this is something Danielle talked about quite at length, so I'll just put it succinctly to end things. There is a seat for everyone in the energy sector. We found that very clearly. There are some seats that are better than others. So as we think about it, it's not just a numbers game, right? Representation at the highest level really matters. So let's work not only on the number of seats, but on the quality and importance of those seats as well.
So I think we end where, at least for me, where we began, and that is the question of whether solutions to these kinds of problems are going to really be written at the state and local community level, or whether the realization of the answer to the climate and energy challenges fundamentally require a national policy at the top under which these other actions take place. And I guess we'll just have to look forward to the next study to next year to get more data on that. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.